Hello everyone, it's Livia here, aka Story Minded, and I'm going to be making the next video for the IGCSE videos English Language Route A. I'm going to focus on the non-fiction text, A Passage to Africa by George Alagiah for this video. What I'm going to do is, unlike I did on the previous video when my brain was not functioning, I'm going to read the text out first. And then my parts of analysis, I'm just going to go through the notes that I've written, because I think it's helpful to just read the text as a whole first, and as I'm reading through it, you might be able to make notes, or I apologise for this. Oh, it's ridiculous. I hate having a cold. It's really irritating, but I think it's helpful sometimes you can pick up things up from a text just by listening to it, and I think it will also hopefully encourage any students out there to read the text yourself as well and try and come up with your own areas of analysis. These videos are just intended for like a building block, or to get you thinking about different ways of analysing a text from someone who's very passionate about literature in general, and I just hope they help in some way, really. But I'm going to read the text out as a whole first, because that's what I tend to do when I read a text. Like, I made those notes as I went through, so I might as well just read the whole thing out and then just kind of talk about my points, but more so as a generalisation for the text as a whole. Oh wait, but before I do that, you can tell I'm not functioning, my brain's all over the place. I'm going to read the bit of context like I always do for the author. So I can't remember if he is still working for the BBC. I haven't seen him for a while, but so George Alagiah, he was born in Sri Lanka, but when he was 5, his family moved to live in West Africa. He lives in the UK and works as a newscaster for the BBC, but once again, I don't think I've seen him for a while, so I don't know if he's still working for the BBC, but that's what the anthology was saying about him. This passage is from his autobiography about his life and experiences as a TV reporter working mainly across Africa, and this extract is about a report he made when he was covering the civil war in Somalia for the BBC during 1991. So with that in mind, this text is obviously of a very serious nature and quite a graphic nature. It's very emotional in places, just to give a fair warning, but this is all contextual, so okay. I saw 1,000 hungry, lean, scared and betrayed faces as I crisscrossed Somalia between the end of 1991 and December 1992, but there is one I will never forget. I was in a little hamlet just outside Gufgada. By the way, I'm not going to be able to pronounce any of these names accurately, so I apologise for that. A village in the back of beyond, a place that aid agencies had yet to reach. In my notebook, I had jotted down instructions on how to get there. Take the Badal Road for a few kilometres till the end of the tarmac. Turn right onto a dirt track. Stay on it for about 45 minutes. Gufgada. Go another 15 minutes approx, like a ghost village. In the ghoulish manner of journalists on the hunt for the most striking pictures, my cameraman and I tramped from one hut to another. What might have appalled us when we'd started our trip just a few days before no longer impressed us much. The search for the shocking is like the craving for a drug. You require heavier and more frequent doses the longer you're at it. Pictures that stun the editors one day are written off as the same old stuff the next. This sounds callous, but it is just a fact of life. It's how we collect and compile the images that so move people in the comfort of their sitting rooms back home. There was Amina Abdurrahman, who had gone out that morning in search of wild, edible roots, leaving her 2 young girls lying on the dirt floor of their hut. They had been sick for days, and were reaching the final, enervating stages of terminal hunger. Habiba was 10 years old, and her sister Ayan was 9. By the time Amina returned, She had only one daughter. Habiba had died. No rage, no whimpering, just a passing away. That simple, frictionless, motionless deliverance from a state of half-life to death itself. It was, as I said at the time in my dispatch, a vision of famine away from the headlines, a famine of quiet suffering and lonely death. There was the old woman who lay in her hut, abandoned by relations who were too weak to carry her on their journey to find food. It was the smell that drew me to her doorway, the smell of decaying flesh. Where her shin bone should have been, there was a festering wound the size of my hand. She'd been shot in the leg as the retreating army of the deposed dictator. So deposed means he's been defeated. He's been taken off the leadership position, took revenge on whoever it found in its way. The shattered leg had fused into a gentle V shape of a boomerang. It was rotting. She was rotting. You could see it in her sick, yellow eyes and smell it in the putrid air she recycled with every struggling breath she took. And then there was the face I will never forget. My reaction to everyone else I met that day was a mixture of pity and revulsion. Yes, revulsion. Sorry, I keep stumbling over my words today. The degeneration of the human body, sucked of its natural vitality by the twin evils of hunger and disease, is a disgusting thing. We never say so in our TV reports. It's a taboo that has yet to be breached. To be in a feeding centre is to hear and smell the excretion of fluids by people who are beyond controlling their bodily functions. To be in a feeding centre is surreptitiously to wipe your hands, so that means like secretively, to wipe your hands on the back of your trousers after you've held the clammy palm of a mother who has just cleaned vomit from her child's mouth. There's pity, too, because even in this state of utter despair they aspire to a dignity that is almost impossible to achieve. An old woman will cover her shriveled body with a soiled cloth as your gaze turns towards her, or the old and dying man who keeps his hoe next to the mat with which one day soon they will shroud his corpse, as if he means to go out and till the soil once all this is over. I saw that face for only a few seconds, a fleeting meeting of eyes before the face turned away as its owner retreated into the darkness of another hut. In those brief moments there had been a smile, not from me, but from the face. It was not a smile of greeting. It was not a smile of joy. How could it be? But it was a smile nonetheless. It touched me in a way I could not explain. It moved me in a way that went beyond pity or revulsion. What was it about that smile? I had to find out. I urged my translator to ask the man why he had smiled. He came back with an answer. It's just that he was embarrassed to be found in this condition, the translator explained. And then it clicked. That's what the smile had been about. It was the feeble smile that goes with apology, the kind of smile you might give if you felt you had done something wrong. Normally, inured to stories of suffering, inured means hardened. Accustomed to the evidence of deprivation, I was unsettled by this one smile in a way I had never been before. There is an unwritten code between the journalist and his subjects in these situations. The journalist observes, the subject is observed. The journalist is active, the subject is passive. But this smile had turned the tables on the tacit agreement. Without uttering a single word, the man had posed a question that cut to the heart of the relationship between me and him, between us and them, between the rich world and the poor world. If he was embarrassed to be found weakened by hunger and ground down by conflict, how should I feel to be standing there so strong and confident? I resolved there and then that I would write the story of Gafgad with all the power and purpose I could muster. It seemed at the time, and still does, the only adequate answer a reporter can give to the man's question. I have one regret about the brief encounter in Gafgad. Having searched through my notes and studied the dispatch of the BBC broadcast, I see that I never found out what the man's name was. Yet meeting him was a seminal moment in the gradual collection of experiences we call context. Facts and figures are the easy part of journalism. Knowing where they sit in the great scheme of things is much harder. So, my nameless friend, if you are still alive, I owe you one. So that's the end of the extract. It's very powerful and very sad. Very poignant. I'm just going to read through some of the notes I made for it. So you have like very simple overall, like there's a couple of more sophisticated in words where obviously George is a reporter and a journalist, but for the majority of the text it uses very simplistic language for stark reality and very explicit adjectives. So you have all the terms of like the suffering and the brutal similes and the brutal scientific words as well that kind of really emphasize this humanitarian crisis. And the verb crisscrossed implies instability, and danger creates imagery of like a war-torn country. So the fact that they're heading and crisscrossing, they have to crisscross because obviously if you're going to a place that's full of civil war, things are being blown apart, things are being destroyed, and the fact that you have to crisscross kind of represents that the landscape itself is broken and fractured. The simile of like being abandoned, forgotten, unknown, and like the name alone, because it's hard for me, like I've never heard of it, my geography is awful, but the name alone implies it is removed from our collective consciousness, because I mean I think the majority of people, unless you are aware of African cities, or not even cities, but like African places, you're not necessarily going to know where this place is. And the adjective little after each pause emphasises how this country is not thought of. It's emotionless, merciless, violent, forceful movement. Tramped? What was I on about? Oh yeah, sorry, forceful movement through the use of the verb like tramped. There's long sentences. There's no time in this for analysing or reflection in the beginning, and the simile represents instability. So in the beginning, it's very much highlighting, it's exposing the ruthless side of the media. They use George uses very objective descriptions and verbs like the collect and compile, how they're compiling and collecting all these images for their news reports, and that's all they care about. The primal setting, like with the huts, and the I can't remember who refers to it as the hamlet, but it's like a very sort of primitive setting, and it's like kind of showing that struggle to survive. It's blunt, so the factual furthers the factual is like furthering the concept of the previous paragraph. So throughout it, it's very much like when he goes into more and more descriptions of the brutal descriptions of people suffering, it kind of really emphasizes how objective they're trying to remain, and yet they're still being impacted by it. And it's like the bit where he describes the little girl who's died. There's like the way he wrote it for the broadcast, it shows like the lyrical quality to the reporting description when he's quoting himself. It almost becomes poetic, and it's that idea of like taking human suffering and then twisting it into a way to not entertain, that's the wrong word, but it's like allowing people in the comfort of because he mentions that fact, like they're selling these stories, they're giving these stories to people who are sitting in the comfort of their own homes, safe in their houses, and it kind of puts it into a bigger perspective, which kind of echoes the end of his extract when he talks about how in journalism, the facts and figures are easy. The objectiveness of being a journalist is easy. The difficult part is figuring out how this ties into the grand scheme of things and how it ties into what type of person you are. Like that's the harder bit. Like trying to hold on to your own humanity when you're a journalist is kind of like a big image that is throughout this text, I would argue. The repetition and transition between brutal facts and the poetic access. So once again, thinking of that as a way for the people at home to be able to access it. He's also very honest in his reaction. Like he admits to us that, through revulsion, like he's actually repulsed by the sights he's seen, and how he's honest about how he's never admitted it in the media. And he also uses like that metaphor of the twin evils between like famine and like the hunger and disease, and like surreptitiously, secretly, formally written as expected of a reporter, but the harsh images fight against this behind the scenes. So it's like how his extract is very much, it has little breaks of the emotional side coming into it, but predominantly it remains very factual. And how when you get to the bit where he talks about, like, if they shake someone's hand and then they wipe that hand on their trousers, it's the idea that you don't see that in the media. You don't see the behind the scenes stuff. You only see they only show you what they want you to see. So it's kind of like the formal aspect of this report, or he's talking about his experiences of being a reporter. But there's that kind of contradiction there where he's actually, this extract allows us into those behind the scene moments of what it's actually like. Simplistic but powerful details. So like the use of the old man in the hospital and how he's got his hoe, the tool to use for like gardening, and the pauses reflecting on the smile that haunts him. It's rhetoric trying to come to terms with how someone can smile in such a horrific situation. So that's kind of like a important part of the text. And once again, with the rhetoric repetitions of them, like with the interruptions of the translator, it shows the distance between being able to communicate authentically. So there's a lot to do with the idea of perceptions in this text, and how the media is ultimately trying to tell the story to an audience, but then that calls into questions the ethical nature of it, and it calls into question how much we see is actually authentic. Like, how much do these reporters actually care about these people? Because in the beginning, they're just explicitly trying to get the most gruesome, graphic images they can to satisfy an audience back home. And it's kind of the hypocrisy of the news, I guess. And that's kind of showed, like, with the inured hardened. So George is very honest. He talks about how after you go on so many of these, like, humanitarian cases and these stories that you're trying to share, you become so used to seeing human suffering that it doesn't really emotionally impact you anymore. But then you've got the macrocosm, which means like the big zoomed out picture. The bigger picture is the macrocosm. You have microcosms and macrocosms. Macrocosms are the bigger picture. Microcosm are the zoom in focus bits. So like the microcosm in this would be like the people, the particular people, they're not characters, sorry, non-fiction. But the people that we meet, the lives that we see, those are the microcosms. The macrocosms is the media. So they're being used by the media to give audiences who are safe back home a story. And George is honest enough to admit that actually he kind of highlights the fact that he did see that smile as what threw him, and that it made him rethink his approach to journalistic work. And the final part I have here is seminal, which means, seminal means strongly influence someone's later development. So conclusion, like his career, this one moment in his career was life-changing. The fact that someone who is suffering smiled due to embarrassment, it made him question himself, and it made him look at himself and think, how can I stand here being confident and like tramping across this, like to refer to the verb that they use where they talk about his camera crew, they like tramp through the village to get all these images, and it made him question and reflect on himself. So there's very limited reflections in here, but when you do get the reflective moments, they're very essential to our understanding of this text, because it proves that George took a step back and he looked at himself and he thought, I can't do this, I can't report in this way anymore, I can't report without having the emotional connection, and it kind of made him question the media as a whole, which is very interesting. Anyway, I hope this video helps in some way, and the next video I'm going to do, or more so, to be more accurate, the last video that I have planned in terms of a non-fiction text is The Explorer's Daughter by Carrie Herbert. So that's the next video I'm going to do, and then I'm going to have to take some time to read through the other texts and write up the analysis for them. But I hope this has helped in some way, and thank you for watching. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. Bye.